Hearing 546. Is there anybody else that would like to testify as a proponent for 546? Seeing none, we'll continue with the opponent testimony. Juliet Abdal, and thank you for coming back today. I didn't pronounce your name right, did I? Okay, Abdal, sorry, thank you.
Okay, sure. Well, good morning to you all, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me once again come back here. We're about 2 minutes away, so really it was no problem. I am Juliet Abdel. I represent the Greater Topeka Chamber. I also am here representing our partners Economic Development Organization, which is a part of the Greater Topeka Partnership, Go Topeka, and also Metal, Manhattan, Emporia, Topeka, and Lawrence's Chamber of Commerce coalitions. Now, most of those communities have submitted their written opposition to Senate Bill 546. I just wanted to add from the lens of Topeka specific, understanding that we agree there is a need for tax relief. We believe that both tax relief and programs like HPIP and PEAK can exist. Our capital city has benefited from these programs, which have seen businesses create jobs with above average wages and bring investment into our community. In Shawnee County, we've had 13 businesses awarded PEAK and HPIP, a combination of new and existing in and out of state businesses. These companies are predominantly primary employers in manufacturing, fabrication, and construction, representing a combined employment of over 5,000 employees. In closing, states like Oklahoma and Kentucky are just a couple of examples that offer job tax incentives while enjoying a lower tax rate. It's imperative that Kansas remains aligned with our offerings so we can continue to be strong and competitive. And we just ask members of this committee not to move this measure forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you stand for questions?
Sure.
Thank you. Do you know what Oklahoma's corporate tax rate is?
4%.
4% versus Kansas at?
Well, I looked in the bill, so we're at 5.75, and it would deduce down to about 3.5. Now, Oklahoma's does also allow for those tax credits, which does bring that down a little bit more.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood where we were, so thank you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Committee, any other questions? I have another one, if you don't mind. So we had some really good testimony. In fact, in opposition, one of the items that he brought up, Mr. North, is the transferability. So if we would to amend the bill and leave the transferability in, and possibly another amendment from the gentleman from Great Plains said that if you're in the program, then you can continue to apply for the program, which makes sense. Absolutely, you don't want to pull the rug. Would those help? Because what we can do is get to a lower corporate income tax statewide, and that is a very good incentive for companies to move to Kansas and to stay in Kansas.
I do believe that that's a good effort, and I laud that you are focused on lowering tax for everyone in totality. I know in comparison to some of the states that I've mentioned, those two programs in particular are the two that stand out from the other communities, and I'm happy to provide that as a supplemental document to consider where we land with those other communities that offer similar incentives. Not exact HPIP and PEAK, but they do offer incentives and also have the tax. So I guess I would love for more focus around if we take those away for future businesses, where do we still stack? Because we know there's still an interest from other businesses that could potentially apply to these. And I'm not under the opportunity to disclose some of those projects, but I do know that there are some that incentives are a factor as to whether they come to our community.
So would you supply that information for the committee to John, and we'll make sure it gets distributed?
Absolutely.
I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Thank you.
Of course.
Our next conferee is Mitch Robinson. Welcome back, Mitch, and thank you.
Glad to be here, Senator. Today I've got two hats on. You can't see them, but I have two because of our change, our schedule yesterday. I've been in this business in August it'll be 40 years. So I've worked in 3 states, my native Kentucky, Those guys in Missouri, I was there for 18 years, so I heard the battles between the two states from both sides now. And this is my 5th community working in Salina. So I've been around, I've seen programs come and go. When I first got to the state, we were somewhat in a kind of state of shambles in terms of economic development from the top level down. We had issues with direction, and I'm very thankful to say that that's changed. Over the last several years, we've now become well-known in the incentive world, in the consultant world, that Kansas is a place to be considered. And with the projects that's been won here, we really can say we're on the right direction. We believe from the community side and from the other hat I'm wearing, which I'll talk about in a minute, 546 is not a bill that we want to support, and we definitely oppose it. Yesterday, you mentioned Great Plains, Kubota comments. I do have some additional comments I'd like to read from Swan's Foods. Alan Poff is the Government Affairs Director. He was on vacation last week and was not able to get us some remarks in time to get a letter, but he provided me some comments yesterday. I'm just going to quickly read them. The valuable state and local support we received while investing in Swan's Company's $600 million expansion of its Salina pizza manufacturing facility was directly responsible for the creation of more than 200 permanent jobs, as well as significant construction jobs for the regional economy. The incentives offered through PEAK and HPIP benefit all Kansas residents and the communities in which they live by attracting economic development projects such as the Swans expansion. Other solutions, such as lowering the corporate tax rate to the level included in the bill, would not be competitive with many other states, including South Dakota, which offers aggressive incentives in addition to a 0 corporate income tax rate. We encourage the state's elected leaders to preserve Kansas's vibrant business economy and competitiveness by opposing Senate Bill 546. For those who wonder why he brought up South Dakota, Swans is currently investing in a major Asian food production facility in South Dakota. So they're quite familiar with that. So in going back to Salina, we have had 12 companies this past year take part in the HPIP program, and 1 has used the PEAK program. We've also had several companies take advantage of the sales tax exemption on construction materials. As we all know, the cost of materials have gone up dramatically over the last couple of years. So I'm going to change hats to my other non-paying job. And part of the reason the senator has seen me up here quite a bit is because currently I'm president of the Kansas Economic Development Alliance, which is our state association for economic development. We have over 120 members from every corner of the state, from the smallest communities to our major metros. So yesterday, Andrew Nave, who's my counterpart and friend from Wichita, had planned on speaking for our association. He unfortunately couldn't be back today, so he handed me off his comments. I encourage you all to take a look at those written comments that he submitted. But the items that he, along with all the others, have been concerned about is that loss of what he called our left and our right hook in economic development. He believes, and we're all in agreement within our group, that these programs, these tools that we have are significant pieces of weaponry, I'll call it, for economic development. These are the tools that are critical for us to be able to have to offer incentives to the state. Now, we're not in disagreement that we need to lower our corporate tax rate. I mean, we're all pigs to some degree. We want it all. I'll admit that. But taking away something like these 2 programs, we're going to be going backwards. It's going to be in reverse from where we've gotten to be in such a good situation here in the state. These 2 tools being reduced, eliminated, are very detrimental to the state. So we would encourage agreement to come together, bring the parties together to try and come up with a win-win situation for all of us. So at this point, that's pretty much, I want to save time for other people to speak and be more than happy to answer any questions.
Senator Clays.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and maybe somebody testified to this and I just missed it, but can you tell us the why of a upfront incentive program like this over long-term tax relief for a company choosing to locate somewhere?
In my opinion, it's those upfront costs that the companies have to put into the projects. There's gotten to be so expensive. The cost of equipment is so very expensive these days. As I mentioned, the building materials have gotten to be so expensive. So being able to front load those projects with the assistance helps reduce the risk to some degree of the companies, but it helps them with their financing on their projects. Senator, I think that's the main thing.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when I read a little bit about HPIP, it also kind of helps when they want to have that competitive salary. So my understanding is that to keep it highly competitive and have high wages, this helps those companies be able to meet that because our workforce is going elsewhere for similar salaries. So I think, having a corporate tax decrease is also a good thing, but I'm not sure that same would go to increasing salaries of the workforce, and I just want your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the workforce, from what I'm just going to talk about Salina because that's what I know the best. We have seen a dramatic increase over the last several years because of the expansions at Great Plains and at Swans and our MRO, our aviation company that we do have. Those companies have come in and expanded their workforce. And to be competitive, they've had to raise their wages. One of my former board chairmen, his plant was right next to another plant, and you would drive out his exit, and there was his competitor next door had a big sign talking about their wage levels. I mean, it's that much at that time was in your face. So we've seen it have an impact in the community over the last several years.
Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You are not the only one that has spoken to this helps all Kansans. We've had several opponents that have said that. And yet when I look at the HPIP map, 40% of our counties have never participated in HPIP. And 18 of the counties that have only one HPIP participant. So what I see in this map that no one has addressed is that the HPIP participation is set at $1 million. Investment that exceeds $1 million. And those counties are the ones that significantly make up a majority of all HPIP. What I see also is that one county happens to be a part of a county that I represent. Johnson County, 111 HPIP programs, which notoriously stacks with Peak as well. Johnson County continues to grow and grow and grow. Sedgwick is the next highest. They continue to grow and grow and grow. They also have the most star bond projects. So when we were working on redistricting, what we heard the most from legislators is what's happening from central Kansas west. And what I see, with the exception of Finney County, which has 7 HPIP programs, there is not aggressive action with the Department of Commerce through these incentive programs to do anything for these counties that have declining populations. You aren't going to get movement, though we keep passing other incentives such as development for moderate and low income housing. Guess where those are located? the same places where the high HPIP participation is. So I would just, for the love of Kansas, have someone speak honestly about what is really being done for all Kansans. Because this map illustrates it's not for all Kansans, it's pockets.
So I would also draw your attention, committee, to a list of peak programs by county. It was also handed out and available too, so that we know if you would like to respond, and we're going to have to.
Yes. The Senator, I think the question, I'm not sure if there's any others from Western Kansas. The old people always look at Salina. We're not really.
They're not going to be in opposition, they don't participate. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
No, you're right. It's unfortunately that those rural counties do not have the industry base to really probably take advantage of it, as well as some places they don't have the skill base. Now, our regional commerce staff, I think they do an excellent job of covering all the communities that they can, but it still has to be somebody on the ground that knows the programs and we're able to bring the parties together.
So I think the point being that this is the government picking winners and losers again, and if we could get the income tax as low as possible, and I think we can get it considerably lower. We heard over $1 billion in tax credits were given out, and legislative post-audit reported it in a 3-year period, $1 billion. Imagine what we could do with corporate income tax with that. So Senator Reddy, and Senator Reddy on a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, but I also had a question. Thank you. So, I think we have the information, as was pointed out, about where PEAK and PIP, HPIP are located. One of the questions I was going to ask you before that comment was made is, Kansas has a 2-tier corporate income tax system. I would like to know where those corporations are located within those tiers, or how many, because I don't know what that.
We'll request that information from research and get it to the committee before we move on the bill.
Yeah, how many are in each of those, and where they are located.
And committee, my intent is not to blow anything up. We are listening to the conferees and making sure that we probably will move on this bill, even if we stripped PIP, HPIP and PEAK out of it. There's other credit programs in here that should be, and I think we can reach a good compromise going forward. Maybe making sure everybody that's in the program stays in the program. We can work some language out. We're not trying to blow this up by any means, but we're trying to lower corporate income tax as much as possible.
I've got to answer your comments about the picking winners and losers. The way I see it from the community side is those companies are making the investments that help the state, that help the jobs. So we can argue all day, I guess.
Yeah, we can. We're not going to debate it, but I'm going to tell you, I've got family and friends out there in Salina, and they're competing against those salaries, and they don't get those benefits. And they're trying to make a living. They've had a business going for over 50 years, and they do not, but they do not get these incentives. And they are competing against you guys for employees, same meat production. So again, I won't get off. I'm sorry, I do not mean to debate the bill. I called you down for it, so I'm not going to do it myself. Senator Reddy, point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I have a few visitors. I have 3 pages today. Hannah from Clay Center, Clara from Riley Grade School, and Teskey from Riley Grade School. And I have Jaden from Manhattan High School, who is the Youth of the Year for Boys and Girls Club. Would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you and welcome to the Tax Committee. And Mitch, I hope you frequent Bogies quite a bit in Salina because it's one of the best places. Yeah.
It is.
Thank you. And thank you for coming. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Holland had a question for you. I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mitch, thanks so much for being here this morning. I do have a concern about peak, and I think it dovetails around some of the comments that were made earlier today. My concern with the P program, as I understand it, is that not only does it allow for basically supporting companies who bring in out-of-state employees, to bring in the thing, but it also basically allows a company to basically, in essence, you can hire Kansans, and that company still enjoys the withholding benefit. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
That's, I mean, we've got our experts right here, so, yeah, nod your head and I'll nod my head, so, yes.
So just to cut to the chase here, I think that is a significant problem, because from my perspective, when we talk about economic development, I think it's less and less about recruiting companies to come, and it's more about where do you get the workforce. And when the Commerce Department, through a discretionary award, is basically saying to certain Kansas companies, we will give you peak as you hire from the Kansas workforce, you are putting those other Kansas companies at a distinct disadvantage. And to me, that is a problem. So I fully support peak as it pertains to if an employer needs to recruit resources from out of state. But to me, when the Commerce Department can discretionarily say, you get to do this and you don't, that to me is a real bad, I think to me, business environment we're creating here, because that's just going to pit businesses against each other, but more importantly, it's going to hurt certain businesses that aren't, basically perceived as being, a growing industry versus others. So I would just have you take that to heart, because that's what I would like to see kind of cleared up or clarified through this process.
All the programs need to be tweaked at certain times when we see they're not being as effective, or maybe they do have a negative impact on. So it's something we need to evaluate.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
Is there anybody else that would like to testify as an opponent? Seeing none, I would draw your attention to the written testimony. And we do have one neutral, Eric Stafford. And Eric, I know you know how to be brief, so thank you. We do have 2 other hearings.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Good morning. Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. Congratulations to the Pages for being here. If you have mediocre grades and don't really study too hard, you can become a lobbyist just like us. Or you can work hard and become a legislator. Good morning. Good to see you all. Little humor on a Wednesday in March. We are neutral on Senate Bill 546. I think the chair's comments are well received from us in terms of, wanting to make sure that we work out a good product here. Our concern is we're going to, eliminate two good programs. Our membership is mixed on this, which is why we're neutral. And those who are supportive are the ones who don't have HPIP credits. They like to see corporate relief. But I'll fill you guys in on some conversations we've had for a while, but really started picking up back in January, working with some of our tax attorneys, seeing the post-audit report that came out and the number of, the dollar amount of credits that are available in HPIP. From their perspective, working with our members, those attorneys are saying that at best, 50% of those HPIP credits will be claimed. So really what we're looking at is, $913 million in the November post-audit report, I think was the number. Half of that is a financial liability to the state that will never actually be realized. That's $400 million we can take for corporate relief. But how do we do that in a way that, one, protects the people that are already in the program and have a current liability or current credit situation? How do we modify the program in a way that protects them, but also helps bring realized financial benefit to the state through corporate relief? So our goal here, and I talked to the chair about this yesterday, we are going to form a task group. I invited Rachel to participate from Department of Commerce as well this summer, and start working through how potentially we can modify these programs. So even if we get corporate relief, say we can get the corporate rate, ideally, if we can get down to 4%, that would be the second lowest, tied for second lowest rate in the nation. North Carolina is number 1 at 2.5% for states who do tax corporate income. And I think even if we can get that corporate relief, incentives still have value. There's still importance to have them. Other states have them. You heard about South Dakota that does not have a corporate income tax structure, but they still offer incentives. And in an ideal world, we don't have them. But our world's not ideal. It's not black and white. There's a whole lot of gray that we have to operate between. And it would be our preference that we live in a world that has both a competitive environment and a positive incentive structure, whatever that might be. If it needs to be tweaking the P program, I think that there's some merit to finding out if they're not working effectively, then how can we either modify them or potentially get rid of them? But I think that these two specifically that have taken most of the attention, there are others in here, but PEAK and HPIP have taken most of the attention over the last 2 days for this committee. Those are valuable tools, and they have been successful in attracting investment in the state. So I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair, but happy to answer any questions and invite you guys to participate this summer. You know, maybe not all of you, so we don't violate any rules, but you know, 1 or 2 of you, so we can keep you can keep up to speed on what the feedback is from our tax attorneys, from our members, and I want Department of Commerce to be involved in too, because we want their buy-in. How we can make it effective. One last thing I'll mention, and I think you addressed this, Madam Chair, is we do have a member that is currently starting HPIP for an expansion actually here in Shawnee County. They have not yet claimed credits because their facility expansion is under construction, and I think the way that this is written, they would then be excluded under this proposal. So they were granted HPIP, they started their investment on that assumption, and then their threat is that this could be pulled away from them. So I think that's something that we need to make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences as well.
So we will be working this bill, and we will look at those items. The reason you haven't heard from any other businesses or items on the other programs is because they're not being used. They haven't been used in the last 3 to 5 years. So it just makes sense to clean up the books.
Yep.
So we are absolutely going to move on this legislation. It's a conversation I've been trying to have for a few years, and nobody was listening. So introduce a bill, and boy, you get some volume. And we need to make sure that we don't blow up the programs, but they do need to be evaluated to make sure that they are the best for all Kansans. So committee, any questions for this conferee? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Eric, thanks for being here. So and I appreciate, because I appreciate you have stakeholders all across the board on the issue about what's the priority. So my question to you is that I just want to talk about HPIP. All right, what is the Chamber's position on HPIP? I mean, do you have a position as far as should it continue on? Should we continue to allow new entities to apply for it?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Senator, I don't know the exact language in our legislative agenda. We do have a specific legislative agenda item for HPIP and PEAK, protecting those programs.
So you would like to see those continue on, correct?
Yeah, I think that they should continue on, even if we can restructure them in a way that provides significant corporate relief. I do believe that we should be in a world where we have both.
Okay, follow-up question, Madam Chair. Second question would be is that, look, you know the type of business formations we have in this state, and it would be my, I guess, perspective that you have a whole heck of a lot more pass-through LLCs that are applying for HPIP than you do corporations. Do you have any thoughts on that? Could you verify my ignorant assumption or not?
I don't have the data on who even has applied. I have a few members that I know that have utilized HPIP, but I don't know statewide who does it, who does not. I know that there are some S corps that's a pass-through entity, but that they're structured in a way that it's employee-owned. You know, that's an example of a company that's not a C corp, so they pay on the personal income tax level. So corporate relief doesn't necessarily help them, but there are pass-through entities that do have HPIP credits on the books.
And I guess that's a point I don't want to get lost is that when we talk about just getting rid of HPIP, we're talking about basically excluding certain business entities who will never see a corporate income tax decrease from now having access to, you know, a capital expenditure. And one other question, Madam Chair, I want your comment, Eric, on this thing about the PEAK. Do you see a problem with the Commerce Department through discretionary award giving certain Kansas businesses, LLCs, corporations, whatever, these peak benefits when they are out hiring Kansas citizens, putting non-peak award businesses at a competitive disadvantage?
I think whether you have peak or not, or whether you have HPIP or not, there will always be, especially in today's marketplace, there will always be a war on talent. And talent, we're in competition for talent with 50 other states, 49 other states, and all the other countries that are out there. I mean, all 50 states are competing for the talent that is there. And there is a workforce issue in our country. And there's very little that can be done because it's data. Look at birth rates, right? And when birth rates are flat, then you're going to run into issues as you have an aging population. I think it's not necessarily putting companies at a disadvantage because of, people are free. I mean, we're an at-will employment state. People are free to leave based on the value of their product and their.
You guys, I'm going to have to bring you in. We've got two other, I asked you to be brief. I guess I should never ask for anybody to be brief because they expand continuously after. And I will say, are there any other questions for this conferee? Seeing none, thank you, Eric. And I would say that those small businesses that won't receive the corporate tax, if we quit giving away the billion-dollar incentives to the large corporations, we could lower personal income tax. Sorry, committee, but on a roll this week. I am going to, is there anybody other neutral? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 536 and open the hearing on 594. And I am going to apologize to the conferees on 594. And thank you very much for your patience. I appreciate it. Amelia, will you give us an overview? I better quit reading numbers this week. 494. Thank you, Senator Kirshen, for clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 494 enacts the Adoption Savings Account Act. Commencing July 1st of 2025, individuals would be able to open a an account with a financial institution and designate the account as an adoption savings account. It would be able to be used to pay or reimburse a designated beneficiary's eligible expenses for the adoption of a child in this state. The account holder would be required to designate by April 15th of the following year following the account opening the prospective adoptive parent that will be the designated beneficiary of the account. The maximum contribution into any account in any tax year shall be limited to $3,000 for an individual and $6,000 for a married couple filing a joint return. And the maximum amount of all contributions into an account for all tax years would be limited to $24,000 for an individual and $48,000 for a married couple filing a joint return. And the maximum total amount in the account shall be $50,000. Monies in an adoption savings account may be used for eligible expenses related to the designated beneficiary's adoption of a child in this state. If you look on page 1, the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2 of your bill, you'll see a list of eligible expenses. It includes legal and other professional fees, fees of a licensed child placing agency, and actual and necessary expenses incidental to the adoption, actual medical expenses of the mother, actual medical expenses of the child, reasonable living expenses. So back to the monies in the account may be used for eligible expenses, may be used for eligible expenses that would have qualified, but the adoption for some reason was not completed. And it may be used to be transferred to another newly created account. It could be invested in certificates of deposit, and it could be used to pay the service fees assessed by a financial institution to maintain the account. Monies withdrawn from the account would be subject to recapture by the Secretary of Revenue if at the time of withdrawal the amount was withdrawn less than a year since the first deposit, or if the monies are used for any other purpose that is not authorized by the Act. Monies that are subject to recapture would be added to the taxpayer's adjusted gross income for purposes of Kansas as a subtraction modification. And if any monies subject to recapture, if there are monies subject to recapture, and the account holder may also be subject to a penalty, and the penalties there are listed. If the withdrawal of the money occurred 10 years or less after the first deposit, then the penalty is 5%. If the withdrawal occurred more than 10 years after the first deposit, then the penalty would be 10%. Penalties would not apply if the withdrawn monies are used for eligible expenses relating to a designated beneficiary's adoption outside of the state of Kansas, or the death of the designated beneficiary. The account holder shall annually file all forms and other supporting documentation that may be required by the Secretary of Revenue with their state income tax return, and prior to July 1st, 2025, the Secretary of Revenue shall adopt rules and regulations. There are some provisions that financial institutions are not required to designate an account as an adoption savings account in their own account contracts or systems in any way. They're not required to track this money. They don't have the obligation of doing that. The state treasurer would have the non-exclusive authority to market the adoption savings account program. And commencing in tax year 2025, taxpayers would also be allowed a subtraction modification from their state income tax adjusted gross incomes for amounts contributed to their adoption savings account in an amount not to exceed $3,000 for an individual and $6,000 for a married filing joint. And also amounts received as income earned, interest like that, is also allowed a subtraction modification on your state return. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book. And one thing that I didn't put in my bill brief that might be of interest is on page 2, talking about the account holder versus the designated beneficiary. So the designated beneficiary is essentially the adoptive parent. The account holder may be the designated beneficiary, but they don't have to be. So they could be two different people. And there's some there in subsection B on page 2. You can see kind of the rules for account holder and designated beneficiary. And the designated and the account holder can change the designated beneficiary over time. So I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Thank you. Committee, our first conferee is Senator Blasey. And I won't welcome you since you sit on the tax committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate you pushing this. I know we're in crunch time in the legislature, so I appreciate you being able to squeeze this bill hearing in, being introduced in the second half of the session. You've heard my story on adoption many times, so I won't repeat it. I know we have a special guest here, Carrie. He's going to share her story, which is a very good story to hear. But this bill is really just trying to create another tool for families who want to adopt. You guys know how expensive it is. I've shared it. I put some numbers in my testimony. They're saying between $20,000 and $50,000 on adoption today by Kansas KVC Health Systems. So it's just one more tool in the toolbox that we can use to hopefully allow families, to empower families to save money and to hopefully adopt that child when the time comes, whether it's a newborn or a child in the system or just a child in need. So with that, Madam Chair, I will just save it for the other conferees. I'll be quick and brief, and we're running out of time.
Thank you, Senator. Committee, any questions for him? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Senator, just real quick. If I am a parent who wishes to adopt and I don't have a lot of discretionary income, if I'm basically living paycheck to paycheck, can I utilize this program?
Yes, I believe this program is structured very similar to the first-time homebuyer program. So it's, you're going to chip in $50 a paycheck or something like that. If you don't have much discretionary income, every penny counts. So it's just one way to start saving.
Just what, Madam Chair, follow up? Okay, and so we had a bill last year, wasn't like fully refundable?
And it just passed the Senate again last week, the adoption tax credit, which is a refundable tax credit. So that would be in addition to this, most likely, just because of the cost of the adoption. But that program's designed for people who really just don't have $30,000 to adopt a child. This is obviously a program that's just going to take time. I mean, $6,000 is for a married couple, $3,000 for an individual. That won't come close to most adoptions in Kansas, but it's a start. It's at least another tool.
Madam Chair, one more. I guess my question is, why do we need a two-tiered adoption incentive policy?
Well, the adoption tax credit is, again, just one option, and the entire credit is not enough in most cases. Specifically in my case, that would cover the total cost of an adoption. And I think anytime we can help get a kid in a loving home, we're going to see rewards and save the taxpayers many dollars down the road, whether it's the criminal justice system, foster care, or any other system.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Senator. Committee, welcome the Honorable Susan Estes to the committee.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I know you have a lot to squeeze in. So I came up with this idea when I heard actually Senator Blasey talking about how wrong his last adoption went. And it reminded me of many people and friends that I've known who didn't have a lot of money in adoption. They put everything they had into their adoptions. And when their adoptions were over, they had very little. And that actually inspired the use of the CD. So if you're a person who doesn't have a lot to set aside each time, at least you are setting aside, and you can also buy CDs, which will help enhance what you're trying to save, and do any kind of magnification that we can. I think it might be helpful for the committee to know that we use the definition of allowable expenses that is already used. I consulted with a juvenile judge in Sedgwick County who does adoptions to make sure that language is harmonious, easily understood. The other thing that I did was model this after first-time homebuyer, because it was a model that was working, and it also makes it easier, I think, for it to be implemented and understood. There was one thing that I failed to think of, and that was the CDs, because we wanted to limit to a beneficiary only having one account, and I forgot to remember that CDs technically each one is a separate account. So I do have an amendment that was adopted by the House that clarifies that and makes an exception. Adam, the reviser, made that amendment for me, and he's also your reviser, so I asked him to make a version for you guys. The other two things that the House committee did, I wanted to be as easy as possible for you guys.
I'll be accurate. Amelia is our reviser, but Adam and Amelia do work together very closely.
Okay,
so.
Thank you. I apologize for the error. Based on what the House, they really loved this idea, and they actually doubled the limits, and that, what limits you're comfortable with is up to you. And they also, some people talked about having desire to, that they or family members had adopted other family members from out of state, so they wanted to remove the limit of just Kansas. So that's a third thing that amendment did, and I'll be happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, any questions? I did have one. What was the House bill number?
2757.
2757. Okay. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify the amendments that are here, just to read it out loud. So on page 3, 24,000 is 48,000, 48,000 is increased to 96,000, and 50,000 is increased to 100,000. Are those the limits?
Yes, that's the limits that they doubled.
And that was passed in the House then?
That would pass through the House committee, and it has not come to the House floor yet, but I anticipate doing so.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Kirshen.
Welcome to our committee. My question is, what part of it makes it so expensive?
Oh, gosh. From our next conferee, you'll hear what happens when one of the parents decides to contest it. Sometimes there are so many different factors. Sometimes you have a really hard time finding the birth father, and your attorney has to go to great lengths to track them down and serve them the notice that they deserve to have. And so there's a long list of complications that can happen. Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, thank you. We'll welcome our next conferee, Carrie Holliday. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you. And My letter of support, I introduced myself to all of you as a farm wife, mom, nurse, manager, community board member, and overall active community person in Jackson County, Kansas, where I live. But I woke up in the middle of the night feeling a really strong need to introduce you to myself financially, which is odd, but I think you need a snapshot of the types of families that are struggling and where we're at. So my husband and I talked about it last night, and we decided we perceive ourselves to be a middle-class family in Kansas. We joked that we'd be upper middle class or a high roller if it wasn't for all these kids that God has blessed us with. But I feel like we're able to do things that many families are not able to do. We're able to take a nice vacation with our family and pay for lodging and nice meals out and really enjoy that time off work. And we're able to pay hundreds of dollars at the beginning of a school year for new shoes and new backpacks if they need them and supplies. I feel like my husband's given me a really generous Christmas budget, so I have between $2,000 and $3,000 to spend on the Santa presents and all the extra activities and memories that we make at Christmas, and I think there's a lot of families who would just think that was extravagant. At the same time, my husband, I'm a manager in the healthcare field on the business side, have a great job with great benefits. My husband is a full-time farmer and rancher, family farm in Jackson County. That doesn't provide for our family, so he works full-time at our local health system in another job in addition to farming and ranching. And we have some struggles that are really typical of middle class in Kansas. We have a special needs child, and it's really hard to pay for a high-cost medication for him. Several times a year, we fall off of patient assistance or some avenue that helps us with that. And we struggle in the summer with rising cost of food and health and childcare with having the kids home from summer. So those are some tight spaces financially in our lives. With 5 kids, a trip to Express Care can become really stressful the next month when you get the health care bill. But I wanted to give you guys a snapshot. We are very committed to not being in debt. But we do have typical debt that many Kansans have of continuing to pay off our home mortgage. We have 1 car payment and have an operating note for our farming expense that allows us to stay operating until harvest or the cattle sell. Other than that, we do not have debt or credit card debt. I want to extend my sincere thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of fellow adoptive families in our state, their adoptee children, and most importantly, on behalf of the courageous birth mothers and fathers whose bravery makes it possible for us to experience the life-saving and family-growing miracle of adoption. Their right to choose their child's forever families and to have a variety of choices in families across different socioeconomic, faith orientations, and values should be preserved. The only way that choice is fully exercised and for all families to have a place at the table is that if we ensure that being able to adopt is not a luxury reserved for the wealthiest. It most definitely is in many ways now, and this bill seeks to level the financial playing field that exists among families that are hoping to adopt. Although this is just another day at the officer committee for you, for me, it is a profoundly humbling experience to be here today, because it brings me full circle in my own journey from someone who just passively supported other family members who were wanting to become adoptive parents to me becoming the adoptive mother of my own precious daughter, Maddie. Although I'm going to share with you the intense financial burden that accompanies these adoptions that appear to be affordable at the onset, please hear me when I tell you that the name Madison means gift of God. And she has been more than worth every financial sacrifice that had to be made to ensure her safety in our family. Because we could not afford the price tag that ended up coming with her adoption. There is a long list of grandparents, best friends, cousins, church members, and even co-workers who financially contributed to making this dream come true for our family. Each of them, if they were here today, they would tell you that the investment of these dollars paid huge dividends in the joy and abundance of being part of placing Maddie in her rightful family, a family that she deserves to call her own. It's also very humbling for me to testify today because, again, it's full circle for me. I was once a desperate mom, praying and crying out for relief from the overwhelming financial strain and applying for grants that we never received. And today I get to try to help adoptive moms that are crying out right now and can't see a way to the family that may very well be possible for them if they had more tools and help. My own daughter's birth mom testified in our adoption trial so that her daughter might remain in the family of her choosing. My daughter's first mother's name is Brandy, and it's my turn to testify on her behalf today. She is very unlikely to ever be welcomed into a room like this or for people to read her words or hear her pleas. Brandy was a child herself when her own father introduced her to drugs while her young mind was still developing. Her upbringing was full of trauma with very little opportunities or resources to support her developing any coping mechanisms other than drug use. Our daughter, Maddie, was the first baby that Brandy placed for adoption, but she was not Brandy's first baby, she was her fourth baby. Brandy's first 3 sons were all taken into the foster system. As Brandy is a homeless, chronically abused woman with a drug addiction, she has an obvious inability to parent. 3 months before Brandy found out she was pregnant with our Maddie, and with no financial planning and feeling like there were discretionary funds behind us, my husband and I followed a relentless and inexplicable drive to pursue adoption. Having lost our only beloved daughter to sudden infant death syndrome 4 years later, the desire for a precious daughter had never left us, and we both knew that restoration might come through adoption. We decided to pursue private domestic adoption through a ministry because these adoptions were affordable.
Your testimony is absolutely compelling. We lose the room in 7 minutes.
Okay.
We lose it in 3, but.
Okay.
So we have your written testimony.
Okay.
And I would ask, could you summarize and would you stand for any questions? And I'm also going to make a statement that Brandy would be welcome in this room. Anyone is welcome in this room because it is a room of the people. So thank you for your testimony. Would you please summarize? And I'm sorry to cut you off because it is compelling testimony.
No, you are fine. Brandy's in a detention center in Harvey County. She won't be testifying in these rooms, but I spoke to her the other night, and I wish you could hear the joy and strength in her voice as she yelled to the other female inmates, "You guys, it's my baby mama." That's me, I'm her baby mama. And my daughter is learning cartwheels. And I wish every baby born into Maddie's circumstances had the opportunity for their birth mom to choose the family they really wanted to choose, and not only the family that thought they could possibly afford the crazy expense of adoption. I had a lot of conflict in coming here because on one hand, we couldn't afford this adoption. On the other hand, obviously we did, and God provided and met for every need that we had. So both are true. It's unaffordable, and God will continue to provide for the families of Kansas that are pursuing adoption, but you have a unique ability to be one of those tools that he uses to do that, which is amazing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Would you stand for questions? Yes. Committee, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carrie, thanks so much for being here today. It is a very incredibly compelling story. My question to you would be this, is that if you had the opportunity to basically exercise a fully refundable adoption tax credit, would that be something that would be of benefit to you in addition to the savings account program here that's being proposed?
Yes. Anything that you can do to help families that are going through adoption and have the cost. In my testimony, you'll see that we depleted a medical account for our child and we're still not recovered financially from a $70,000 plus adoption. So anything would be helpful. The thing that's really attractive about this plan and practical for families is many families are on a long road to adoption. Ours was fairly short if you look at it. And those who are on the long road to adoption would have less financial stress if they had money ahead of time instead of after your adoption is final. We did not get our tax credit benefits until close to 2 years after the adoption because of complications in proving all the things that I didn't even understand it. The state already knew she was adopted, but it was very difficult to get the tax credit, although we're grateful for it and it helped replenish our medical account.
Thank you.
Yep.
Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Carrie. Any other proponents? Seeing none, any opponents? Any neutral? I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 494. Committee, we only have one neutral conferee for 5:36, but I feel like it would not do it justice, so we will have the hearing tomorrow. And then we will work bills as time allows. So could you come back tomorrow, Michael? Thank you, thank you. Thank you, committee. Is there any other business? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.